About a year after the last part of Canoeing the Hoosick was published, I found myself back on the river. The water level was very high in the spring and very low later on due to the late summer drought. I missed the opportunity when the water level was low enough to be safe and high enough not to bottom out. But in September we got about 3 inches of rain, just enough to bring the level back up to a good depth. So as soon as I could, I hit the river in my new kayak. Not having found anyone to drop me off and pick me up, I prayed about it and woke up in the night with the answer. The first day I kayaked halfway from Eagle Bridge to Buskirk shooting video, then returned upriver to where I started. The second day I started at the Buskirk Bridge and kayaked upriver to where I left off the day before, then shot video downstream back to Buskirk. The second day was the hardest as I had to fight the current upstream and as there was a wind which seemed to oppose me both ways. The first day I used an old cell phone attached to the kayak plus my video camera on a tripod. The cell phone recorded corrupted video and I spent half a day getting it off the phone and repairing it. The second day I just used the video camera, which bounced around more and was negatively affected by light reflecting off wind-blown leaves and water, requiring a lot of time processing to minimize the flicker and flash. Here and there I have inserted still photos from when my daughter and I canoed this section 9 years ago to provide some relief from the constant rocking of the kayak. Philip Van Ness of Albany acquired 1,600 acres of the Hoosick patent, which would most likely be Great Lots number 27, 33, 34, and 35 on the accompanying map. When this transaction took place is uncertain. He was born in 1717, so it would have had to have been after 1737. However, it's doubtful he would have had that kind of money at 21. It probably would have been after his father died in 1758. He organized a settlement there, which also probably was not begun until after the French and Indian War was settled in 1763. It was called Teoshoke, and there are a number of different spellings and pronunciations of it. Supposedly the Mohican word means a narrow place, probably a ford. It is spelled differently yet in the map. The main settlement was at the north end of the Busker-covered bridge. There was no bridge at the time. Among the settlers recruited were Peter and Elizabeth Fond of Ely. Peter wouldn't have been legal age of 21 until 1766. Another set of settlers were Nicholas William Grosbeck and wife Gertrude Waldron, also called Charity. Nicholas was born in 1744 to William Grosbeck and Catharina Van Ness, so he wouldn't have been 21 until 1765. As both of these are named as original settlers of Teoshoke, we can safely conclude it wasn't settled until 1766 or thereafter. Nicholas and Gertrude had a number of children, the son William Nicholas being of interest as he would marry Peter and Elizabeth's daughter Elida Veely in May of 1793. Gertrude died before 1813, and Nicholas remarried to Sarah Van Wert about 1818. They had one daughter, Harriet Maria, before Nicholas's death. Sarah and Harriet inherited the farm, which probably made Nicholas's other children angry, but they ended up in the Washington County poorhouse on March 10, 1830. Later they moved to Scaticoke. Sarah is buried in the small cemetery across from the Scaticoke Fair entrance. Harriet married John Turner and they moved to Michigan. William would have grown up on his parents' farm, which Nicholas Will states that straddled the Turnpike Road, called Stage Road today, with the house and some land on the southeast side in what became White Creek in 1816. There was also land on the Cambridge side. William and Elida were given a piece of land along the river here by Peter Veely when they married, but they deeded it back the next year. I'm not sure what happened. Peter couldn't read or write, but he was a successful and prosperous farmer. William doesn't seem to have been able to manage money. When Peter died, he willed a quarter of his estate to each of his other 3 daughters and their husbands with no reservations. But with Elida, the will was carefully and extensively worded to keep William from ever getting his hands on any of her fourth part. William and Elida had 8 children. Nicholas William, born 1794. Hugh Veely, born 1796. Garrett, born 1799. Peter, born 1801. Charity, born 1803. Dow, born 1805. Cornelius, born 1809. And Yakimin or Jemima, born 1810. I am primarily going to follow my wife's line up. Most of the others will come back into the narrative now and again. Nicholas married Lucy Day of Marlborough, Vermont. They lived in various places before finally settling down in Searsburg, Vermont. Hugh married Tamerson Rich, and they lived in Salem, New York, then later in Kingsbury. Garrett and Peter ended up in Iowa. Charity married Walter Still of Oppenheim. They lived in LaSallesville, New York, Woodford, Vermont, Franklin County, Ohio, and finally Birmingham, Iowa. Dow and Cornelius settled in Illinois. William and Elida seem to have stayed in the general area of Buskirk until 1805. All their children up through Dow were christened at the Scattercoke Church. They then moved to a farm on lot number 23 of the Daniel Claus patent northwest of Mayfield, Montgomery County, New York. But they seem to have mortgaged and lost it by 1808, returning for a time to the Rensselaer County side of the Hoosick. William served as a rifleman for 3 years in the War of 1812. Then before 1824 they moved to another place north of LaSallesville, Montgomery County, in Scotch Bush, now Church Street. At about the same time, Nicholas and Lucy moved to close by in Palatine, and Lucy's brother Giles to Rockwood, which is just to the east. William was a founding member of the Dutch Reformed Church in Ephrata in 1824, along with Walter Still and John Deneuer. Lucy was a Seventh-day Baptist. I once asked the docent at 4 o'clock what brought so many people out to that part of the state at that time, and apparently the building of roads opened the country up to grain farming and being able to ship their crops east, and of course the Erie Canal. They all show up there in the 1825 New York census, but by 1830 they were all gone except William and Elida and Lucy's brother. Walter and Charity Still moved to Woodford, Vermont in 1829. Nicholas and Lucy Grosbeck followed by 1830, settling further up the mountain in Searsburg, along what is now Route 8. These were the years the road over the mountain from Bennington to Wilmington was being built. It opened up the country, and they may have found work building road. It's a cold place, though, up there. They weren't too far from Lucy's childhood home in Marlborough, however. The Foster family came up from Massachusetts to Putney, Vermont, where they lived for many years. Eventually they left Putney, and most of them moved to Greene, New York, near the Pennsylvania border, where they stayed and are buried in the Lower Ganselet Cemetery. Daniel, however, seems to have settled north of LaSallesville, where he owned a farm just east of the Grosbecks. In 1828, he and his wife lost a child at birth. I suspect his brother Charles came up from Greene to help out, where he happened to meet Joachim Grosbeck. They married and moved to Salem, New York, where Hugh and Tamerson lived, settling in the Camden Valley of Shushan. William and Elida disappeared from LaSallesville after 1830. William showed up again alone in Franklin County, Ohio in the 1850 census, living with Walter and Charity, who had left Vermont around 1843 to 48 and settled there. Where he had been between 1830 and 1850 and where Elida died and is buried is information I don't have. Charity's brothers Peter and Garrett and a David Grosbeck had been there in 1825 and moved on to Iowa between 1836 to 1840. Walter, Charity, and William soon followed and are buried in Birmingham, Iowa. Peter and Garrett disappeared into history. Dow and Cornelius settled in Illinois. He had previously married in Montgomery County, New York, to Mary Locke in 1828. She died in 1844 in Jefferson County, New York. In 1862, he remarried to twice widowed Eliza Helm and Fraser Plankerton. Dow was interviewed in 1888 for the portrait and biographical album of Joe Davis in Carroll Counties, Illinois. He stated he had a sister Charity in Vermont. They must have lost contact because since 1850 she had been living south of him in Iowa. They could have visited, kind of sad, but also strange because he knew his father had been living in Ohio with one of his sons, but he had actually been living there with Charity and Walter Still, and moved on to Birmingham, Iowa with them around 1850. Cornelius died in Stevenson County in 1846. Nicholas and Lucy and son George moved west sometime after 1850. George stayed, became an ox trainer and a justice of the peace in Neillsville, Wisconsin, and died in Green Bay in 1895. Nicholas and Lucy moved around, as did son David, who eventually ended up in Oregon. Lucy moved back to Searsburg sometime before Nicholas returned. Lucy died in 1872, Nicholas in 1881. The water has been pretty calm and smooth through this section, but in a few minutes I'll be turning northwest and it will get rougher. I'll also be fighting the wind, strangely enough, as I had to fight it coming the other direction. And here we see the Buskirk-covered bridge coming into view. Before 1802 there was just a ford here, possibly a ferry. In 1802 to 1804, Martin Van Buskirk built the first bridge across the Hoosick. Martin was born in 1755 in Athens, Greene County, New York. He served in the Revolution in 1778 from Cambridge, Albany County, New York, probably from Teoshoke at the north end of the bridge ford here. In 1791, the north bank of the river became Cambridge, Washington County, and in 1815, White Creek, Washington County to the east, and Cambridge to the west. The land to the south, which became Buskirk, was also in Albany County, then Washington County in 1791, later Rensselaer County. It gets confusing. Martin died in 1828 in Buskirk and is buried in Island Hill Cemetery with his wife Maria Van Ness. Once the bridge was built, all the businesses at the north end moved across the river, and Buskirk became the central village of that area. With the coming of the railroad in the late 1840s, it prospered even more. There was once a huge creamery at the south end where the parking lot is now, plus the road out to Route 67 was lined with businesses. Due to ice jams and flooding, which have even endangered the bridge at times, most of the buildings are now gone. There is still one house there. The present bridge, a Howe Truss design, was built in 1857 and replaced an earlier Burr Truss bridge. Burr Trusses combined an arch and a king post design. Downstream a couple of miles is the hydro dam, which probably backs water up here more than it was in the 1700s.